Welcome to the Small Church Great Commission podcast. My name is Micah Yarger, and I am joined by my good friend and co-host Matt Levernight. Matt and I are classmates in the Alliance Center for Leadership Development School of Ministry. And Matt, could you introduce yourself and just tell us where you're from and where you're working and what you're doing at the moment?
Yep. Well, I'm a native of the notorious Flood City, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, lifelong resident of southwestern PA, with deep roots and Mennonite background, actually. And I came to the Alliance about 3.5 years ago when I started attending Somerset Alliance Church. And it was there that I received a call into ministry, and I joined the Alliance Center for Leadership Development's program. Great to be with you here, Micah. And since we have that shared passion for small churches and out of the way places.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for joining me on this, little endeavor. And I think it was something. This podcast was an easy thing for us to both jump on board with because Matt and I, we've had pretty frequent phone calls, and we usually end up talking about ministry things. And so, yeah, we're doing you the service of bringing you inside of our conversation. So we'll find out whether or not you're going to thank us for that after an episode or two. But you're going to get some insight.
It's basically a wiretap, but it's legal.
Yeah, right. We're allowing it. So, yeah, great. So, yeah, as I said, my name is Micah Yarger, doing the ACLD program with Matt. So just a little background on what that program is. So the Christian Missionary Alliance, the denomination faith family that we are part of, they actually have an avenue to train people to be licensed workers and to be ordained workers and accredited workers in their denomination. And one of the requirements for licensing and ordination in the Alliance is to have 30 credit hours of Bible and or ministry, um, uh, academics. So the ACLD program satisfies that requirement, and there's also a class on the polity and history of the Alliance, and it is a great program for someone who feels a call to ministry, particularly someone who, like Matt and I, we both started the ACLD quite a ways after college here. We've already gotten our degrees and started careers, and then the Lord was like, "Hey, I have some more for you to do," and it was the way I put it, Matt, and I think you would agree, is the ACLD kind of removes a lot of the excuses that traditionally people have had to not get biblical education. It's not expensive, um, at least comparative to going and getting your master's degree. It's not expensive comparatively. You can do it from home. You can do it online. Even the cohort model, like Matt and I do, we're in a cohort together where we're with a group of people that we've grown close to and gotten to know pretty well, and we have an evaluator that we've really gotten accustomed to and really enjoy, Jesse Toaston and his mentorship and guidance over the last couple years. Even with that cohort model, you greatly can manage your schedule throughout the week. It's not like there are these set times you have to be in class every night. You have videos and lectures that you do at your own time, and then there's a whole other path within the ACLD that's completely self-directed. You can truly do the classes at your own pace. um, so the ACLD has kind of removed those excuses that a lot of us have. I don't have time, I don't have money, um, and it's truly boiled it down to, I think, calling people to ministry that are going to be effective in today's culture. And I think a lot of people that are going to be going into ministry now are going to be bivocational people, They are going to be people who are, is serving full time, but need to be more missional and have that life experience. For instance, Matt has spent, years in the corporate business world, and he's worked, manual labor, he's done skilled labor, he's done a lot of these different types of things. Whereas, there was a time where people who were career pastors would connect with folks who were just off the street a little bit easier. But now you have, I think, an advantage of, you have been in the world, and you've worked in the secular business world, and so the ACLD is something that Matt and I are both in, and it's been a blessing to us. And the passion that Matt and I share why we're starting this podcast is, we both, our heartstrings are kind of, pulled by the idea of ministry, and maybe, I want to say maybe more smaller settings, maybe even more obscure settings, your small towns, your rural areas, your fringe places, the forgotten places in a lot of cases. And we've shared that passion in our conversations, and we've had some good conversations about how to maybe tackle some of those issues. This podcast isn't going to be Matt and I solving all of those problems ourselves. I think that you're going to see us pulling in guests, and we're hoping to bring in the expertise of other people. Matt and I, we're brand new. We're learning this. We are not explicitly not experts currently, but we want to talk to a lot of experts, and we want to learn from them. But I think we both have a healthy recognition that those disciples weren't experts day one either. So we all start somewhere. But Matt, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about your perspective of this passion for small churches, ministry in the fringes. What kind of guy wants to go and pastor a small church that's probably in an obscure place, that's declining, at least in the world's perspective, declining? We have conversations about what decline really is later, but what makes you passionate about something like that?
Mm. Yeah, well, Micah, before I get into that and answer that question, I just want to add a little more on the ACLD program and just say that, props to the Christian Missionary Alliance as a denomination for making that pathway open. There are, of course, many denominations that do require a master's level education for their ordained ministers, but the Alliance has always been, I mean, they have missionary in the name. We're a missional movement. We recognize that God calls many people from many walks of life, and to have something like the ACLD, which I always describe in shorthand for the people I hang out with as preacher votech, because
Yeah,
that's something that makes sense to my father, the electrical contractor, for
right,
instance. If I say a preacher votech, he knows what that means. And
right,
when I was an insurance underwriter, my parents had no idea what I did for a living. They knew I made a lot of money and I was good at my job. They had no clue exactly what I did 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Whenever you say God's calling me into ministry, now they sort of have an idea of what I do do with my life.
right.
But the ACLD, really great resource. The people behind that program have done a fantastic job, and obviously it's subject matter specific and it's targeted to the needs of people in one particular denomination. But I would say that if you are part of an alliance church, it is a fantastic way to get education. And since you can take the courses at a self-directed pace and just take individual courses, it's even a great opportunity for people who aren't feeling called into vocational ministry to get a little bit more formal Bible education. Like they have some really great courses on Bible study techniques that may really benefit someone. And these are not hard courses. Like these are associates level courses. These are not master's level courses.
Right.
So don't feel afraid to dive into that.
Right.
But as far as my passion and as far as what makes someone go to a out of the way place, well, you have to be a little bit crazy. Of course, pastor friend of mine said all pastors are crazy, uh, and that came straight from a man with 40 years of ministry experience. But he said
It
all
surely
pastors.
helps.
Yes. Look, you know, Christianity is crazy to begin with. uh, Being called into ministry is crazy to begin with. And so, whenever you hear the call to an out of the way place, God does not forget any of his people wherever they are, whether they're in a big city or in a rapidly expanding suburb in the Sun Belt, or whether they're in a out of the way town in the Rust Belt or up in the Adirondack Mountains. God cares for all of his sheep. He hears the cries of all of his people, and he answers prayers by sending men and women out into the harvest, into the places where they're most needed. But I do think that to serve in one of those areas, you have to have a little bit of life experience to give you some street cred with those folks, and that can look different depending on the situation. For me, as someone from right at the intersection of the Rust Belt, coal country, and farm country, I don't have the kind of street cred you need to go to inner city Philadelphia. Flip side is that someone from an urban center might have a lot of respect, carry a lot of credibility in that urban center. They would have very little credibility talking to a guy who works on a John Deere day in day out. So whenever you go into one of these out of the way contexts, people in these out of the way areas, they're typically much more close knit. A theme that I think we'll come back to is the idea that people in rural and declining areas tend to make their family their church rather than making their church their family. If you're in a growing area where many people are newer to the area, they're often coming to a church and they're looking to build a community in that church because they don't have community anywhere else. In rural Pennsylvania, typically everybody in the church is related to each other. So that can be a challenge, and that's something that I think you have to have grown up around to really understand it. And for me, I did grow up around that. I the church that my parents were married in, that I grew up in for the first 10 years of my life, I could walk out the back door of that church, walk into the cemetery, and quite literally trace 200 years of my maternal grandmother's family tree.
Yeah.
Uh, there were headstones with my maternal grandmother's maiden name on them from the early 1800s.
Wow, that's
That's
incredible.
just the nature of rural churches, and so you have to have that understanding. And the things that you don't understand, the Lord's going to equip you with, and that comes back to, I guess, probably the single biggest thing for someone to be called into one of these places is you have to have an absurdly high amount of faith. Like you have to have George Mueller level of faith of, George Mueller was the guy who never asked anybody for a donation for his orphanage, always trusted God to show up with the resources they needed just in time. And you have to have that sort of absolute insane level of faith to say, well, God's calling me to go do this, and I'm going to go do it, and I don't know how it's going to work out, because quite frequently you're stepping into a church where they can't pay you a full-time salary. So not only do you have to figure out how to lead this church, you also have to trust that the Lord's going to provide an additional source of income for you that's going to be that your work hours are going to be flexible enough to still be the pastor of that church. It takes a lot more faith to walk away from a secular job, make a midlife career change, go to a small church, than it does to hear the call when you're 15, major in Bible, go get your MDiv, and then go to a larger church. And unfortunately, many of the people coming out of a master's program, they have to go to these large, prosperous churches. They simply can't afford, with their level of student loan debt, to roll the dice on that. And that's another reason that these mid-career changes and these lower cost ways of getting theological education are really going to change the game for the church in America.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. The game is changing, right? The the churches in the rural and small towns are in decline. I think that we're seeing some really positive, awesome things happening in our urban centers, particularly in the area of missional networks. I think about Joel Repick and the Greenhouse Network, and the growth and just the the pure organic Holy Spirit movement happening in those settings. So I think that can happen in the rural areas too. I think God wants to move like that in the rural areas. I think kind of in the rural and the small towns, we're still kind of figuring out what that's going to look like. I think that it's not going to be exactly the same as it's done in an urban center or in a highly populated suburban area. Ministry is going to happen differently than it happens in big churches. There's a lot of unique things when it comes to small church. A guy I love to listen to, Mark Clifton, doesn't like the term small church. Because of just the statistics of what the sizes of churches are. I don't remember what they are, but it's something crazy. It's like 75 or 80% of churches out there have less than 300 people or 200 people. You might know the statistic, Matt, but
I think I've heard Clifton talk about it. I want to say I think more than you know what, I'm not gonna make a
yeah,
ballpark guess
it's
because I would just be pulling a number off the top of my head.
yeah, and it's a big number. Like it's more than you would think are that small. But most churches, it's safe to say, most churches have less than 300 people in them. Most churches have less than 200 people in them. So he's like, we really shouldn't call these churches small churches. He calls them normative. As a normal size. These churches are
Hmm.
normal size. It's
Yeah.
your big churches are the ones that are not normal. That's less common. So most people are being discipled by small churches. Most people are getting saved in small churches. Most people are, you know, just name your, spiritual milestone. Most people are part of small gatherings and small churches. Come back to the Joel Repick conversation, the Greenhouse Network, the missional communities, church in its simplest form. People meeting in houses, prayer, reading the word, breaking bread, worship. I mean, that's the church in someone's house. Missional outposts, missional networks. So, that's kind of part of this whole conversation too. Is how it's not really necessarily a new idea that we're talking about. Churches have been small for a very long time. Most churches have been small for a very long time. I think that the difference in the where we're gonna have a lot of focus of our conversation is the ground we're losing in small church settings. Most of those churches are declining. It's a fact. Most churches in urban or it's in rural settings, small town settings, most of those churches are declining. We're not seeing growth in established traditional small town rural churches. Um, I think that we need a fresh expression of the gospel in a lot of small town rural areas. And I think that my hope is that a podcast like this maybe our passion is contagious. Maybe God uses our passion and our love for this subject to stir someone else to consider serving and start thinking about how the kingdom can be revealed, how the kingdom can advance in rural areas and small towns and that type of thing. So, yeah. But great stuff, Matt. Thank you for the intro. And I guess what we'll do now is we're going to, give a little teaser for our next episode. This is, we're going to look at this as our introduction to all of you and give you a chance just to get to know us and our passion while we're doing this. So, but I want you to tune in because we are going to be bringing another episode out to you. And the title of this episode is going to be 5 Reasons That Small Churches Deserve a Podcast. 5 reasons that small churches deserve a podcast. So tune in for that. Watch the YouTube channel. Like, comment, subscribe. Share it with a friend. Share it with someone who's maybe doing ministry in a rural area and say, hey, listen to these goofballs talking about rural ministry. You should call them and tell them what to do because we would love to hear from you. Maybe put a comment in the comment section below of how you've been impacted by a small rural church and why they matter to God. Those are things we'd love to hear and love to talk about. We are also open to in the comments of suggestions for future podcasts regarding ministry. Maybe you are one of those unsung heroes serving in a small church in the middle of nowhere, and you have challenges in front of you, and you're like, man, I wish these guys would talk to someone about this. Those are things we would love to tackle in future episodes. So feel free to comment as much as you'd like, bring as many suggestions as you'd like to bring. It only helps the cause of the algorithms for our video. So the more interaction, the merrier. We'll respond to everything that you put in there. Any closing thoughts or remarks for our introduction here, Matthew?
No real closing thoughts, although maybe we should tell them, give them a little bit more of a teaser and let them know what those 5 reasons are so they can be listening for those on our next episode. But number 1, we have small churches are often overlooked. Small churches have unrealized potential. Small churches require different tactics. Small churches have unique challenges. And small churches have a role in the Great Commission.
Great. Yep, that's it. So tune back in. We're going to tackle these subjects. And I think that everyone will agree that no 2 ministries are the same. So, and it's very much true in rural church ministries. So there's some unique challenges that rural and small towns and small churches are facing. So, all right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you in the next episode. Thanks.
Tune in next time.